The snow stretched endlessly across the northern plains, an ocean of white beneath the gray sky. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, whipping against the barbed fences that cut through the wilderness. On that bitter afternoon, the silence of the land was broken only by the sound of footsteps crunching through the snow. A man in a brown coat trudged forward, his breath fogging in the icy air, his eyes heavy with a storm of emotions. Ahead of him, bound against a wooden post with coarse rope, knelt a woman. Her hair fell wild and damp against her pale face, her dress torn and dirt-stained, yet her presence radiated a quiet strength that no rope could fully restrain. At her knees, 3 newborns lay wrapped in thin cloth, their fragile bodies pressed against the merciless snow. Their cries were weak, fading against the roar of the wind, but each sound pierced deeper than any blade. The man stopped a few feet away. He stared at the scene before him, the woman's trembling lips, her red raw hands tied behind her, the helpless infants lined in the snow. For a moment, he could not move. His body was numb, not just from the cold but from the crushing weight of guilt. This was his doing. His name was Elias Wren. Born into hardship, he had clawed his way through a cruel world that offered little kindness. As a boy, he watched his family perish one by one. Hunger claimed his mother, disease took his sister, and the unforgiving winters of the frontier stole his father. By the time Elias was 16, he was alone, with nothing but a hardened heart. He learned to survive by bending his morals. First, it was small thefts, a loaf of bread, a scrap of meat. Then it grew into larger deeds, smuggling, lying, and eventually working for men whose names were whispered with fear. By his 30s, Elias was known as a man who got things done, a man willing to stain his hands when others would not. Yet somewhere along the path of shadows, he met her. Her name was Leora. She was unlike anyone Elias had ever known, soft-spoken, yet unbreakable, with eyes that seemed to see the better man buried beneath his scars. When Elias first laid eyes on her in the village square, holding a basket of herbs she had gathered for the sick, he felt something shift within him. She did not flinch at his reputation, nor did she cower at the darkness that followed him. Instead, she spoke to him as though he were simply human, not a beast molded by misfortune. Against all odds, they fell in love. For the first time, Elias tasted warmth that was not born of fire but of companionship. He tried to leave behind his old life. He worked honest labor when he could, built a small cabin near the forest edge, and dreamed of a family with Leora. But men like Elias never escaped their past so easily. The snowstorm of this cursed day had its roots in debts unpaid. Elias had once made a pact with a dangerous syndicate, a trade of weapons for protection. When he walked away from their world, they did not forgive. Years later, when Leora bore children, they returned to collect what they believed was theirs. They demanded his loyalty. They demanded he return to their fold. When Elias refused, they made their threat clear: "We will take from you what you love most." And so, under the shroud of a moonless night, they came. They dragged Leora from the cabin, still weak from childbirth, and bound her against the cold post by the fence. They placed the infants, his children, in the snow at her knees, knowing the icy breath of winter would do what their hands need not. They left Elias with an ultimatum: either bend his knee once more, or watch everything he loved be buried beneath the frost. Now, he stood before the family he had sworn to protect, paralyzed by the cruel choice pressed upon him. Leora's head lifted, her hair falling from her eyes. She looked at Elias, not with fear but with sorrowful defiance. "Do not give yourself to them," she whispered, her voice hoarse yet firm. Elias, breath hitched. "Leora, the children, they'll die." Her gaze softened as she glanced down at the tiny bundles of life by her knees. Their skin was flushed with cold, their fists clenched as if already fighting to hold on. Then she looked back at Elias. "If you return to that life, if you sell your soul to save us, then we are already lost." Tears burned Elias' eyes. He fell to his knees in the snow, the cold searing his skin through his trousers. His hands trembled as he reached toward the children, adjusting their thin wrappings, desperate to give them any warmth he could. He wanted to scream at the heavens, to demand why fate had always been his enemy. "I cannot watch you die," he choked. Leora leaned closer, her voice breaking but steady. "Then fight, Elias. Fight not with their chains, but with your heart. Save our children by being the man I know you are, not the monster they want you to be." Her words, fragile as they were, struck him harder than any blow. Elias rose, his jaw set, his fists clenched. The cold no longer numbed him, it sharpened him. He turned his gaze toward the path the men had taken, their footprints still etched in the snow. A fire ignited within him, not the fire of rage he had known for years, but the fire of purpose. He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around the 3 infants, tucking them together to share their warmth. Then he knelt before Leora, his hands fumbling against the knots that bound her. The ropes cut deep into her skin, but slowly, painfully, they began to loosen. When her arms fell free, she gasped, not from relief but from the sting of blood returning to her limbs. Elias cupped her face in his hands. "I swear to you," he said, his voice low and trembling, "I will not let them take you. I will not let them take our children. Not while I still draw breath." Leora's lips quivered into the faintest of smiles, even as tears streaked her cheeks. "Then go, Elias. End this." Elias followed the footprints through the snow, each step heavier than the last. His mind was a storm of memories, the faces of his lost family, the hunger of his childhood, the cruelty of men who preyed on the weak. And now, the image of Leora bound in the snow, her spirit unbroken, and the cries of his newborns clinging to life. He carried no weapon but his will. He carried no shield but his rage. Yet as he pressed on, the man who had once been a servant of violence found himself transformed. This was no longer about debts or survival. This was about redemption. And Elias Wren would not falter. What followed that night became a story whispered across villages for years. How one man, fueled not by greed or vengeance but by love, stood against the syndicate that had enslaved countless souls. They say the snow itself turned red where he fought, his fury a storm greater than winter's chill. They say no chains could bind him, no blade could pierce him, for he fought with the strength of a father, a husband, a man reborn. By dawn, Elias returned. His body bore wounds, his hands trembled, but his eyes burned with victory. He collapsed into the snow beside his family, gathering Leora and the children into his arms. They were safe. For the first time in his life, Elias did not feel the weight of the world pressing down upon him. He felt only the fragile, priceless warmth of those he loved. Years later, when their children grew strong and the cabin by the forest echoed with laughter instead of sorrow, Elias often looked out at the fence where Leora had once been bound. The snow still fell each winter, the wind still howled, but he no longer heard only the silence of despair. He heard the silence of peace. And in that silence, he knew that love, fragile, fleeting, yet unyielding, had saved him from the darkness forever.